When we speak, we do not only use language for the purpose of stating facts or issuing commands and directives, but we also use language to carry out interrogations or ask questions. This brings us to the study of interrogative sentences in English. What are interrogative sentences? Interrogative sentences, as the name implies, are sentences that are used to carry out interrogations. They are sentences used to make inquiries or confirm what had already been said for the sake of clarity. Take for instance, who is the richest crypto trader in the world? The sentence above is an interrogative sentence because, as you can see, it performs the function of making an inquiry. Types of interrogative sentences. There are two main types of interrogative sentences in English, namely, polar questions and non-polar questions. Polar questions. Polar questions refer to questions that require a yes or no answer. This type of questions, due to their structure, demand a response of either yes or no, nothing more or less is required. The only recognized type of polar question is yes, no questions. Yes, no questions. Yes, no questions are simply questions that require an answer of either yes or no rather than extended explanations. Take for instance, will you come to the party tomorrow? Can you cook delicious meals? Do you like to travel around the world? Is tomorrow convenient for you to visit us? Can you play the guitar well? All the interrogative sentences above are all yes, no questions, because they require yes or no answers. Forming yes, no questions. Yes, no questions are polar questions that are formed by a process popularly recognized as subject-verb inversion. What this entails is the exchange of positions, in a sentence, between the subject and the verb. While it involves a substitution of positions between the subject of a sentence and a verb, it is not just any verb that can be used in the substitution. Only auxiliary verbs are suitable for such substitutions. Because only then can yes, no questions be accurately formed. Take instance, you can wash dishes. The sentence above is a declarative sentence, but when we substitute the subject, you, with the modal auxiliary verb, can, any auxiliary verb including primary and modal auxiliary verbs can partake in the substitution, the sentence would be transformed into a yes, no question. As in, can you wash dishes? Notice that the main verb, wash, was not substituted because if we were to use the main verb in the substitution, it would lead to an ungrammatical formation, wash you can dishes. This is why we always substitute subjects with only auxiliary verbs, in forming yes, no questions. What happens when we encounter sentences without auxiliary verbs? When you are faced with transforming a sentence that does not contain an auxiliary verb into a yes, no question, you simply have to substitute the subject with what we recognize as the dummy do. Take for instance, he cooks. Converting to yes, no question, it would read as, does he cook? You can see that we have created a yes, no question using subject dummy do inversion, and also transferred the inflectional properties of the main verb, singular and present tense, to it. The concept of dummy do is based on the idea that the auxiliary verb, do, is always present in sentences but is omitted in order not to sound too formal or emphatic. Take for instance, he does cook. You can see that emphasis is being laid on the verb, cook, right? You can also see that the dummy do absorbs the inflection of the main verb, cook, leaving it in base form. So when we invert, we get this, does he cook? Non-polar questions. Non-polar questions are questions that are different from polar questions. Unlike polar questions, non-polar questions do not require a yes or no answer. In fact, there are times when they do not require an answer at all. There are four types of non-polar questions, namely, WH questions, choice questions, question tags, and rhetorical questions. WH questions. WH questions are non-polar questions that are introduced by WH words. They include the following: who, when, where, whom, why, what, which, and how. Take for instance, who is the mayor of Florida? When is the best time to plant a tree? Where was the greatest city in Greece? Whom would you blame? Why does it matter to you? What is the best gift you've ever received? Which is the best of the books? How do you cope with stress? It is important to note that a unique feature of interrogative sentences is that they always end in question marks. Unlike declarative sentences and imperative sentences that end in a period or full stop, interrogative sentences are always concluded with a question mark. Choice questions. Choice questions are non-polar questions that let you choose from alternatives. That is, they are interrogations that demand answers based on presented choices. These questions provide you the opportunity to choose between two or more alternatives which would then become your answer. Take for instance, would you like tea or coffee? Do you prefer to stay another day or to go home? Would you have pasta or rice? Should we invest in real estate or cryptocurrency? Will you feed the poor or help the widows? Each of the questions above presented alternatives which you can choose from depending on your individual preferences, which is the purpose of choice questions, to give you options to choose from. Question tags. Question tags are non-polar questions that are used to confirm a person's opinion. They are formed by a combination of a declarative sentence and a question at the end which is regarded as the tag. Take for instance, you wouldn't leave them to starve, would you? In forming question tags, there is what is recognized as positive propositions and negative propositions. When the declarative sentence in a question tag is positive, not containing the negation, not, the tag must be negative, containing the negation, not. But when the declarative sentence is negative, the tag must be positive. Observe the following: you can talk to me, can't you? Positive, it won't take place today, would it? Negative, she knows the truth, doesn't she? Positive, they aren't lying to us, are they? Negative, we can meet today, can't we? Positive, it isn't convenient for them, is it? Negative, notice the contractions between auxiliary verbs and negations in forming question tags. For instance, are and not, become, aren't. This is the proper way to present them in question tags as opposed to writing them out in full. Rhetorical questions. Rhetorical questions are non-polar questions that do not require an answer. Rhetorical questions are simply fact-checking questions, used for the purpose of making people reflect on their actions, rather than providing a response. Take for instance, how old are you? Aren't you too old to be playing like this? Have you no shame? What sort of an embarrassment is this? Is this how you plan to repay my kindness? These are questions we are all familiar with, and can agree that no response is required whenever they are asked, because they are just fact-checkers. Difference between interrogative sentences and declarative sentences. Both interrogative sentences and declarative sentences differ in a number of ways. Interrogative sentences are used to ask questions, while declarative sentences are used to state facts. Interrogative sentences end in a question mark, while declarative sentences end in a full stop or period. Interrogative sentences often entail the substitution of positions between subject and auxiliary verbs, while declarative sentences do not. Difference between interrogative sentences and imperative sentences. Interrogative sentences are used to ask questions, while imperative sentences are used to issue commands or directives. Interrogative sentences end in question marks, while imperative sentences usually end in full stops. Interrogative sentences usually have subject, while the subjects in imperative sentences are always omitted but implied. So interrogative sentences are sentences that are used to carry out investigations. They end in question marks and often require answers. The two main types of interrogative sentences are polar questions and non-polar questions. The only type of polar question is yes, no question, while the types of non-polar questions include WH questions, choice questions, question tags, and rhetorical questions. Understanding interrogative sentences will better inform you on how to use them effectively in writing as well as in day-to-day conversations. See you soon.